From Conquest to Canaan. That's been the overarching theme for our reflections over these days, weeks, and months, as together we've journeyed with Joshua, this great leader of Israel. Journeyed with him from his calling as the assistant of Moses. Journeyed with him across the river Jordan. Journeyed with him in walking round the walls of Jericho. Journeyed with him as he engaged the Gibeonites and were deceived by them. Journeyed with him as he allocated the land to the different tribes. Journeyed with him through all the experiences of his life and ministry. And in our concluding reflections this week, we're looking very purposely at the legacy which this great leader left, leaving a legacy. And Joshua certainly left a legacy. What is the spiritual legacy which you and I will leave to the next generation? You see, legacy is not what you put into your will, but what you plant in people. It begins not when we die, but when we decide who we live for. Legacy commences when our lives start shaping the lives of others. And these truths were so true in Joshua's life and in his death. And Joshua's legacy was seen in his rest as he was laid to rest. Let's read the verses from Joshua 24, which speak of Joshua's death. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. I love the simplicity of these verses. They speak to me of a life well lived, of a people led well, of a race run, of a work finished. You see, God had used this man, Joshua, to bring the people into the promised land, and God had used Joshua to lead the people in the right way. Throughout the life of Joshua, God had proven himself to be faithful. Joshua died at a ripe old age, 110. I wonder how many of us will live to 110. I suspect very, very few indeed, if indeed any of us. Joshua died at an old age and was buried in the land of his inheritance. There is no record that there was a great funeral or a great mourning for him, but he was simply known, note this, as the servant of the Lord. What a tremendous epitaph to have on your gravestone, that you were a servant of the Lord. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua. This was the greatest tribute to Joshua, to this good and godly leader. His godly influence was effectively communicated to and through the whole people of Israel. Joshua's legacy was seen in his rest. And as Joshua is laid to rest in the promised land at a place called Timnath Serah, which means portion remaining, his portion of blessing, his reward remained as he entered an altogether different promised land, heaven itself. It's interesting that Joshua himself chose where he would be buried after the division of Canaan, and his choice reveals his humility in asking for Timnath Serah, a city in the rugged, infertile, mountainous district of his own tribe. It's interesting as you read the few verses thereafter that Joseph and Eleazar are also mentioned. Joseph, who had died many centuries before in Egypt, is brought in his coffin to Canaan and laid to rest, the fulfillment of a promise made back in Genesis 50. And Eleazar is also buried. He was the son of Aaron, the first high priest, and the death of Eleazar marks the changing of the guard, not at Buckingham Palace, but in Israel. All the old-timers are now gone. All those who came out of Egypt and out of the wilderness have now passed from the scene. All those God used in such a mighty way are now dead. And now it's time for a new generation, a new Joshua generation, to pick up the mantle of service. Let me finish with this. Joshua's death marked the end of an era of physical conquest and direct leadership. Joshua, in so many respects, highlighted the need for a greater Joshua, Jesus, to provide permanent rest and salvation. Joshua, whose name means Yahweh is salvation, prefigured Jesus, Yeshua. However, Joshua was a mortal servant who had to pass on leadership, while Jesus is the eternal divine King whose work never ends. Joshua's death at 110 years of age, a sign of a life well lived, a full and fulfilling life, was final. But Jesus' death, praise God, on this Good Friday was not the end, but the initiation of a resurrection victory for all believers. While Joshua's death concluded his earthly ministry, Jesus' death and resurrection achieved eternal victory over sin and death, offering a perfect and everlasting covenant. And so on this Good Friday, let's not just remember all that we've learned in our journey with Joshua that speaks so much of life's experiences and points in so many ways to Jesus himself, of his goodness, of his faithfulness, of his provision, of how he fights our battles and how he takes us towards that promised land, to our Canaan, that land flowing with milk and honey, towards being with him. On this Good Friday, let's not just remember all we've learned in our journey with Joshua and of how Joshua points to Jesus, but let's be deliberate and intentional and careful to remember Jesus himself, who took that journey to a cruel, rugged cross for us. Let's remember that although it's Friday, Sunday's coming. God bless you.